Hello, welcome to our Introduction to CEDH learning series. The goal of this course is to teach the basics and fundamentals of CEDH, or Competitive Commander. This course is for anyone who wants to dive into the competitive part of the Commander format but don't know exactly where to start. This course does assume you have an understanding of the EDH or Commander format as well as an overall understanding of Magic the Gathering as a whole. Today we are going to talk about card evaluation. Basically, what makes a card worthy of inclusion in your CEDH deck. This video will introduce you to the basic concepts of better card evaluation and better card selection. Before we dive into the nitty-gritty, let's take a very simple example. Here we have two cards, Croatian Grip and Nature's Claim. Both are green and both are instants. They both remove an artifact or enchantment. Croatian Grip costs 2 and a green. Nature's Claim costs 1 green. Croatian Grip has split second, meaning you cannot add any spells or abilities to the stack while this one is currently on the stack, until it resolves of course. This basically makes this card uncounterable. Nature's Claim gains the controller of the permanent you're destroying for life. So, which of these cards do you think sees more play in a CEDH setting? The answer is Nature's Claim. But why? What makes this card the one you run over Croatian Grip, a card that is essentially uncounterable in a format that interacts heavily on the stack? The answer is in the mana cost. Croatian Grip is 3, while Nature's Claim costs 1. But to better understand this, you need to look at not just the raw number, but instead what the number represents. By and large, across all formats of Magic, the winners of the most games are the ones who are able to maximize their resources to their fullest potential at all points in the game. Now, while we won't be getting into any Magic theory in this series, it's important to understand why Nature's Claim is the preference for most CEDH decks. When interacting in a format that can be over as soon as turn 1 in extreme cases, the ability to have answers as soon as possible is critical. Furthermore, holding up resources to interact and then not interacting is essentially a wasted resource. It is much easier to hold up 1 green mana every turn to interact with a problem permanent than it is to hold up 3 mana every turn. The more you waste by holding for interaction, the less you have to spend on advancing your own board state. When evaluating cards in CEDH, the first thing you have to look at is the cost to play the spell in question. Ask yourself the questions. How many turns before I can cast this spell? Are there additional costs? Are there alternative costs? How frequently will I be casting it for its alternative costs versus its regular costs? Are there restrictive conditions? How easily are those conditions met? Let's take some quick examples of higher costed cards for CEDH. The first one is Deflecting Swat. The CMC for this card is 3. However, this card is normally cast for 0 CMC due to its alternative cost. The card is good, but it skyrockets in quality once you have your commander on the battlefield. Another one is Occam Adversary. This card is 4 CMC to cast. However, its reduction criteria is usually always met at a CEDH table due to the abundance of green in CEDH. Finally, we look at the king of alternative costs, Force of Will. This spell is 5 CMC, an unheard of cost for a counterspell. Yet this card is one of the kings of counter magic because its effective cost is 0. This grants you the ability to interact with people on turn 0, meaning before even your first turn. It also allows you to tap all resources entirely to go for a win and still protect it. The jump from 1 mana to 2 mana is massive in CEDH. The jump from 2 to 3 is even larger. The majority of spells in CEDH are 3 CMC and lower. The higher the cost, the higher the impact the card will need to have. For example, Ad Nauseam is 5 CMC, no alternative costs or reductions. But the payoff for this card resolving is worth so much more than its cost. Ad Nauseam will frequently let you pick up a third or more of your deck from a single card. This is a perfect example of high payoffs. When evaluating mana cost, there is also the mana requirement in the cost to consider as well. Let's take a look at 2 cards. The first one is Counterspell. The second one is Delay. Counterspell costs 2 blue to counter any spell, full stop. Delay costs 1 generic and a blue and counters any spell as well, but essentially your opponent gets the spell back in 3 turns. Delay is seen in a higher density of decks than Counterspell. Why? Because the difference between 1 blue and 2 blue is significant. This gives the user more flexibility, especially when in multiple colors. A card is made of more than just costs, as you well know. Another thing to take a look at is its impact on the game. When evaluating cards, you have to look at its flexibility, its impact, and its payoff. This is easy to evaluate with things like removal. You know you will need to remove troublesome spells and permanents from your opponents. But what about spells that progress your game plan? What about spells that win you the game? By and large, most spells in CEDH are instants. This is because of their flexibility. Sorceries, by their inheritability, are not going to be as good as instants when tasked to do the same job. You do not want your removal to be restricted by speed. You may need to remove something on someone else's turn, and therefore you need to have the ability to interact at instant speed. That's not to say that sorceries are absent in CEDH, there are plenty of high-impact sorceries. When looking at cards, you must consider its impact on the game. Things like Notion Thief and Limvala, Keeper of Silence, cost 4, which is outside of our normal range for spells, but their impact on the game are massive. Limvala shuts down all opponents' activated abilities of creatures and is a flying 3/4 body. This means that it can block multiple threats in our format, as well as straight up shut down mana dorks and even high-profile commanders. Notion Thief is a card that creates massive impact the moment it hits the board. Drawing a card is a big part of CDH and EDH and Magic in general, and having that ability shut off is big. What's even bigger is the fact that they now have to answer the card that gives you more cards with the actions of their own decks. Brainstorm, Rhystic Study, Mystic Remora, and the like are all effectively worthless with this on the field. It's a very high impact card. Finally, look at the payoff from a card. The first example is Necropotence. Remember when we said that mana requirement and the costs matter? That still holds true, but the payoff for this restricted cost is worth it. You play 3 black as soon as you can, and the payoff equals to being able to dig through your deck at an unprecedented rate. Having a full hand of 7 each turn is worth so much more than the restrictive cost. Its payoff is worth its cost. Let's dig a little deeper into the effects of cards. When evaluating cards, you must look at a card's effect from a floor to ceiling perspective. Many mistakes that are made when it comes to card evaluation is overinflating its effect because it's frequently judged on what it could be rather than what it is. Let's take a look at the example of Visions of Beyond. Its floor is to pay 1 blue and draw a card. Its ceiling is to pay 1 and draw 3 cards. That's Ancestral Recall. This card is amazing. Or is it? When we look at the criteria to hit its ceiling, it becomes too narrow for a payoff. There are actually very few times in a CEDH game when you are going to have 20 cards in the graveyard. Believe it or not, this doesn't happen much. I can hear the cries out in the comments already, but this card is great in decks that mill your library. What about things like Hermit Druid? This card is so good in that strategy. That may be true, but once again, evaluating a card on what it could be versus what it actually does is the folly of many a Magic player. Which leads us to the next point. How often is a card effective in a game? When you are evaluating the ceiling and floor of a card, you need to look at it from the perspective of how often the ceiling and floor are present in a given game. Is a card you're evaluating good at many, if not all, phases of the game? Not just things like upkeep, main phase, or opponent's turns, but from the game as a whole. Is this card effective during the first 1 to 3 turns of the game? What about the mid and late game? If a card isn't effective during most phases of the game, it's considered a dead draw. A lot of cards that are used to execute a game-winning combo are often seen this way. Outside the turn you're going to win, this card is dead in your hand. So that's why you want your cards to be as flexible as possible, as much as possible. A common strategy to win games in CEDH is Demonic Consultation and Thassa's Oracle. Cast Demonic Consultation, name a card you know isn't in your deck, and exile your whole library. Thassa's Oracle will evaluate that condition and you will win the game on the spot. So, are these dead cards? For the most part, Thassa's Oracle is never played outside the game-winning turn, so a lot of times it can be considered a dead draw. Demonic Consultation, while frequently used to win the game, can also tutor any card in your deck at instant speed for 1 mana. This is a high-risk, high-reward type of tutor we call the forbidden tutors, since they have very large downsides. So, while you would be frequently saving Demonic Consultation for your game-winning turn, it can be used in a pinch to find a key piece of removal if you know someone is about to win on their turn. These are the types of flexibilities we seek when evaluating our cards. So now that we have an understanding on what makes a general card viable for CEDH, let's take a look at some quick commander evaluation. There are a couple of key elements to consider when evaluating your commander. One of the biggest factors in deciding commanders is whether or not it's a key piece of your win con. Let's take the commander Elsha of the Infinite. Elsha is a great commander that allows us to play off the top of our library. This, combined with Sensei's Divining Top and cost reducers such as Ethereum Sculptor, allow us to draw our entire library. This effectively makes the criteria of drawing your deck go from finding 3 cards in your library to finding only 2, since one of them is in the command zone. This is true with so many commanders, largely because of the accessibility of the card in the command zone. Examples of this are Narumeha, Najeela the Blade Blossom, the Gitrog Monster, Selvala Heart of the Wilds, and Godo Bandit Warlord. Another consideration is whether or not your commander has a powerful effect that plays into your main strategy. Lavinia, Azorius Renegade, has a powerful effect available in the command zone to help slow down your opponents. Another consideration of a commander is its cost. How hard will it be to cast this commander? You hardly ever see a commander in a CEDH deck cost more than 5 mana because having a higher cost is much too restrictive. A perfect example of this is Razaketh, the Foul-Blooded. This card is extremely powerful and has the ability to win the game when it lands on the battlefield. So, why isn't it seen in the command zone? Having it cost 8 the very first time you cast it is so restrictive, you'll find that too much of your resources are spent on just to try to get it to stick. You can spend far fewer resources finding the card from your library and putting it into your graveyard and reanimating it instead. Finally, a big factor that is considered for your commander is card advantage. There is a reason that Tymna the Weaver and Thrasios Triton Hero are the most used commanders in CEDH. They are both low-costed card advantage engines in the command zone. Thrasios can ramp you and draw you cards. It can also be used as a win con when presented with infinite mana. You can draw your whole deck and win the game. Tymna the Weaver allows you to draw up to 3 extra cards per turn, though most of the time it's still drawing you 1 to 2 extra cards, and that's still pretty significant. Having the card advantage engine in the command zone is very important to CEDH, and you'll find that most CEDH commanders do this. Tymna and Thrasios, Kenrith the Returned King, the Gitrog Monster, Thorvald the Fey Cursed King, Edric Spymaster of Trest, and so on. We have covered a lot about cards in this lesson, and hopefully you'll be able to better evaluate cards for your inclusion into your deck. Stay tuned for when we will be talking about CEDH deck types in our next video. What questions do you have about card evaluation? Do you wonder why a card may or may not be seen in certain CEDH decks? Ask us in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.